Welcome back. I wish I was a fly on the wall and could have listened in on the discussions around this, around comprehensive reviews. That's going to lead to more or less rotation amongst the firms. In any event, it's now time to respond to a number of the questions that came in. We won't be able to cover them all off. So to the extent we don't, we'll get them on our blog afterwards. You can go look at that and we'll carry on the dialogue. But let's get started. Here's something from Calgary. And Eileen, I'm going to send this your way. Discussion of reporting is often focused on financial statements and MD&A. Why not the AIF? What's its role? Does ignoring AIF result in duplication in the MD&A?
I'm a boilerplate hater from way back. So I think we had this question both from Calgary and Vancouver, and I would say start a movement. The AIF is probably one of the world's least valuable documents. So they either have to figure out how to make it different and useful, or I think they should just say, that this really isn't adding much. It's an interesting question because it's very difficult to get rid of things once they've been there a long time. But I often think that this is one of these terrible ones where people fill in the blanks and the thing looks the same every year except for a few minor changes. I really think this one needs a definitive review as to its utility. Was that tactful enough?
By the way, I was watching Cameron when he was making a few notes, and I know he doesn't work in this area, but made a few notes on that. But Cameron, I'm coming to you with another question from Toronto. And it's asking, what is the purpose of the MD&A? Is it a component of the financial statements or a promotional, future-oriented shareholder presentation?
Right. Well, the MD&A form does spell out what the purpose and intent of it is, so I'd refer the person who raised the question to that form. But my perspective on this is that it really is trying to help explain the financial statements, trying to provide insights so that investors have a better understanding of what's going on in those financial statements. Also provides a forward-looking orientation to the operations of the entity. That kind of a perspective is very useful. I think the danger of MD&A and financial statements is what I mentioned before, the duplication sometimes that can happen, and so making a concentrated effort to avoid that duplication would make a lot of sense. But really the MD&A is supposed to add value from management's perspective. How do they see the financial reporting and the financial operations and the financial position, and they work hand in hand in my view.
Yeah, and of course we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of the MD&A, and it really is a great document to get your story across, both in terms from a strategic perspective, both historically but prospectively. And by the way, many reports say people are a little worried about talking about the future. They get focused on the past, but it is important to have that future-looking prospects into the document as well. John, concept of value creation and long-term value. This is coming from Toronto. Long-term value for shareholders seems paramount. Addressing the very long-term health of the planet, global warming and ocean management is also paramount. Should these very long-term issues be a subject of disclosure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I think back about the economical story, I feel guilty I didn't mention some of these other elements, because I'm certainly one who believes corporations are much more than producing financial results. They have a purpose and a responsibility that includes society and certainly includes the environment. So the notion of a triple bottom line, or whatever you want to call it, kind of reporting actually resonates with me. I know it'd be difficult. It's probably not soon to come, but that doesn't mean there isn't value to disclosing those things companies are doing or not doing in that regard. So I certainly personally do think there's merit for companies to share and disclose things that they're doing to support environmental issues and even beyond that to societal benefits that they create.
Yeah, I think this one absolutely has momentum. There are the sustainability reports that are going to come out. Of course, we had the big conference over in Paris. Mark Carney has come out and said, listen, we need to have more disclosure. And David, I think institutional investors are saying, hey, we want to hear more about, carbon and climate warming and how you're managing that risk. So I think you are going to get a lot more. This is clearly something that's evolving. David, here's one from Toronto. Accounting and valuation are different disciplines. With the increasing prominence of fair valuation in financial statements, what steps should an audit committee take to ensure the company's management and auditors have sufficient valuation expertise?
Well, you can imagine, Don, for accountants, you'd want to make sure they were, chartered accountants or CPAs to do your work. For evaluators, I'm happy to say there's an institute in Canada called the Institute of Chartered Evaluators. It's been around for 25 years. There's no such body in the United States, and they're just starting one in Canada. And these are accredited evaluators. So you can look to your auditing firm to see that the people doing the work on valuation actually are accredited evaluators. And in terms of your internal staff, this is something where, there are courses that they can take, et cetera, et cetera. So there is an opportunity in Canada to be able to become educated on valuation and actually, with your auditors, have accredited evaluators actually do the work. So I think we're at a great advantage.
Eileen, given our audience, I think this is a terrific question about, the demand on resources and if you're a smaller company coming out of Saskatoon. And the question is, how do you balance the need for growth in an entrepreneurial, tech-based company environment with the rigor and process required for quality financial reporting and internal control?
Yeah, obviously not an easy thing when your resources are limited, but there's almost no company these days that doesn't have capital constraints one way or another. And I guess my view is if you've taken other people's money, an investment in quality financial reporting and internal control is something that you should have from the very beginning. You shouldn't be trying to implement these at some middle stage of life. And yes, bare bones perhaps at the beginning, but with qualified young people who can grow with the company and grow their knowledge, as David says, whether it's valuation or anything else. I just think that the discipline and rigor that is required when you are raising money in the public environment is something that you should build in as a discipline early. And yes, you have to watch the costs, but I think it pays dividends later.
David, this is from the Belle Province, Montreal. Other than the obvious, what should a new financial board member ask as a question of the auditors around cybersecurity, risk, and fraud?
I think, Don, it's interesting. Auditors actually are not responsible for cybersecurity. What they will do during their audit is they will look at the IT controls that impact financial systems. So again, auditors are giving an opinion on the financial statements, so it's systems impacting those statements only. In terms of the general realm of cybersecurity, a number of the firms have consulting units that actually could come in and do an assessment of the robustness of your whole cyber protection. So you could ask them to do that. On the topic of fraud, again, firms generally will give you frameworks on entity controls, which your management can use to do sort of a self-assessment on where we are on the entity control level, which of course is tone of the top and code of conduct and the other controls you would have to look at the whole issue of fraud. The whole internal control topic area of segregation of duties is very, very important. So there's a lot of value that auditors can add in that area.
Cameron, this is an interesting one. Someone in the audience believes there's some very huge holes in IFRS. So let me put this question to you. Given the extensive deficiencies of IFRS, does the OSC have immediate plans to bring forth a Canadian supplementary requirement package? For instance, more on related parties, toughen up cash requirements for reasonable assurance for revenue recognition, etc. So interesting perspective.
Yeah, I guess I probably wouldn't agree with the person raising the question. I don't think there are extensive deficiencies in IFRS. When we do file reviews, many are done without any comments being raised whatsoever, and the financial statements are fine, and we don't have any problem with the information going to the investor. The deficiencies that we find, and sometimes those are quite black and white, non-compliance with clear IFRS standards. And so I would submit that a lot of the standards are clear. I think the key message that I would want you to take away is when the standards aren't clear and there's a decision to be made, a judgment to be exercised, that's really where sort of business sense and experience and professional judgment needs to come into play to think about what's the right answer for my investor group. When I have to select something that's not crystal clear in the IFRS standards, then how do I get the right information for my investors? And if you make that choice in a reasonable way, you're not going to hear any objections from the regulator. I think everybody always wants every answer to every question. We're not in that world, and I think we have to be comfortable using some judgment every now and then.
There's still a number of other questions, but I'm going to ask each of my panelists with a very crisp, what is the one thing you would suggest to the audience, the audit committees, of what they should be thinking about in the near term and perhaps longer term? David.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think good governance includes strong operational risk management and how you can actually leverage that to give you a competitive advantage.
Eileen.
Question of what audit committees can do to enhance audit quality, and I think the answer is lots. I think audit committees have to up their game in terms of what they're telling investors in the proxy document, for instance. And I think that doing these comprehensive reviews are a great way to understand the relationship between the company and its auditor.
John.
I think from a corporate reporting point of view, it would really be that the audit committee really needs to understand how corporate reporting is helping tell the story, and in doing that, I think they really need to think about how you report on value you're creating today versus those measures you're taking to create value for the future, and have a real balance between those 2 points of view.
And Cameron.
John, not having been a public company yet, has a benefit in front of him of avoiding all of the financial reporting bad habits that we have built up in our culture over the past decade, of using a checklist mentality, of providing every disclosure that we think is mandated by IFRS, instead of using a materiality notion, thinking about what really is important to investors. And I think that's the way you streamline your disclosures and think about what's important, what do I need to include in my financial statements and MD&A, what do I not need to include. And I think that's a journey that we're all going on. And John has the benefit of starting fresh right now. I think that's...
So I get the last words. Absolutely. I think this move to quality reporting, corporate reporting and financial reporting is a journey. You need to decide if you want to get on it. It's going to take some work. There's some opportunities in the MD&A. Certainly the non-GAAP measures, if you're not looking at those, have a close look because they are very important. And by the way, that 2015 year-end meetings, the review of the valuations, impairment, fair values, I think is going to be a fair amount of work. So good luck with that. A couple of quick announcements. We put out annually a document. It looks like some fruit growing here. Ingredients for success. It looks like a fruit mixer. Striking the right balance. But these are key recommendations, not just for audit committees, but for the boards. That'll come out to be available on our internet site. So please do access that. On the theme of corporate reporting, you will see this in your package. It's a very short survey. Please take a few minutes and provide us feedback and help us be a little more informed on this issue and the journey that we're hoping everyone will embark on. Looking forward to your feedback. Give us feedback. We have our website and blog to carry on the dialogue, so we will be covering those off and responding to some further questions. Mark it in your calendar. Our next session is on April 7th, and the topic is dealing with boards taking a long-term view around their approach to strategy. And, on the theme of today, corporate reporting, we'll hear about the activists. We'll hear some good practices from family-controlled businesses and private equity. And I know you'll enjoy the session. So once again, Happy New Year. Glad you can join us. Hopefully lots of food for thought. And good luck on those year-end audit committee meetings. Take care.